So today we're going to talk about the miter saw, and the miter saw is one of the neatest tools really that you can have in your shop facility. There's a lot of things that the miter saw can do. It's also a great tool to replace the more dangerous radial arm saw. And so it can do a lot of the things the radial arm can saw you would used to use the radial arm saw for, and it's a lot safer tool and a lot more portable. And so we're going to focus heavily on the miter saw. We use it quite a bit for a lot of different cuts because it's designed for those kinds of things. But this is our miter saw, and you can see at this point in time, this miter saw is stored what we call in the down locked position, and that's how we want to store our saws, is always down and locked down so that the saw doesn't raise up. And so the way to get it out of the down lock position, and one of the first things you're going to do so we can show you the rest of the saw, is you're going to release the latch. And on this saw, it's pretty straightforward. Normally you do it from the front, but I'm going to stand back here so you can see where it is. But basically you just push down a little bit on the saw, and there's this little black knob right here. And you just slide that back, and then you just let the saw raise up. Okay? And this is kind of the saw in its operating useful position as it is right now. Now when you take a look at this particular miter saw, we call this a compound miter saw, and that's because it can do a couple of different kinds of cuts all at the same time, or compounded on top of each other. Some of the more basic miter saws may only be used to make angled cuts, and so this particular saw, we can do angled cuts with it. You can do a straight on cut like it is, or you can adjust your table one way or the other, upwards of 60 degrees on one side and 50 on the other side, to make angled cuts on your boards. It can also do mitered cuts, which means that the head of this whole saw body will tip one side and then tip to the other, so that you can do mitered type cuts for trim and those kinds of things. It's a compound miter saw because technically you can do an angle cut and a miter cut on top at the exact same time. So you could do a 45-degree angled cut with a 45-degree mitered cut and have a piece of crown molding or whatever you need that piece to do that particular compound cut for, but you can do it all in one pass. And that's the beauty of the compound miter saw, is instead of having to do a 45 angle and then pull it off and readjust and then do a 45 mitered, you can do both at the exact same time. Saves time, energy, and most often it's a bit more of an accurate cut. Otherwise, a few other anatomy pieces on this saw before we show you how kind of some of it works. This is our cutting table, just like anything else. This is a 10-inch miter saw, which means that the blade here is a 10-inch blade, and so we can make cuts in that realm. We do have a nice guard on the blade. Never try to use this saw with the blade up or in weird positions. Make sure the blade works as you push the saw down. Okay? Also, the guides are guards on the table to help you get a square cut. They will also slide depending on where you need them to be. If you've got a longer piece of stock or taller that you need that guide to be there. It also has a clamping device so that if you have a piece that's awkward or maybe warped or something like that, you can lock it in, and then this piece will clamp down, and it can sit either on this side of the saw or on this side of the saw. If you to move it, there are two holes on this back side, and so you just put this shaft in and you turn it, and it'll slide down and lock and go from there. Also on this, you can adjust height. You can adjust the height of it and also push the piece down and thread it down. Cutting the safety zone, there should be no fingers or hands within 4 inches or where these red lines are on the table. Your hand should be outside of that. If your piece is shorter than that, you shouldn't be holding it with your hand. You should be using the clamp to hold that stock into place. Okay? So if you want to make a perfect 90-degree angle cut, just a straight cut on the board, right straight across, say on this board right here, you would just lay that board on there and you can make your cut. But if you want to make a different cut, like an angle cut, It's pretty straightforward to adjust this saw. There's two locking devices that you release. This particular piece slides out and locks over in that position, and this lock raises up. From there, you can move your saw from one side to the other, okay, wherever you need it to go, barring that that's out of the way. You can come all the way over, or you can go all the way that way, depending on what kind of angle you want it to be. You find whatever angle you want to be. You can use this this guide right here, and you have your protractor along the side. Your most common cuts, if you look closely at this table, you'll see these big notches. Those are the most common angled cuts that you're ever going to make with a miter saw, and that's where this little handy deal comes into play that you released earlier. Because if you want your cuts to be on the common pieces, you release that, begin to slide, then you just lock that, hit it like that, let it kind of sit free. And as soon as it hits the most common angled cut, which is a 15-degree angle, that's going to lock into position. And you know that's going to be a 15. Wherever you want that angle cut to be, if you want it to be one of those spots, you let that hit where you want it to go, and then lock it down. Okay? This right here is the lock release. If you want an oddball angle that isn't one of those spots, you just move it to wherever you want it to go, lock it down, and go. Okay? That's the angle cuts for any of those flat angles that you want to make. Now, we said again, this was a compound miter, and so you can also do miter cuts. That release happens with this piece and that piece. Flip up, flip down. Now, your whole saw will move one way or the other all the way to 45. Okay? To make sure that you're going to come all the way back up to 90, you're going to flip this up, and then you're going to come up, and that's going to be your stop to make sure you hit 90, and then lock it into position. Now you should be back to the normal 90 degree position. Again, just release both if you want to do any kind of miter. Okay, if you want to do a 30 degree, you just lock that down, and you've got your 30 degree cut to come back up to 90, release, lift up, come up, back, lock. Okay? Now, anytime you make any of these adjustments with the saw, we have all these nice little lines and guards in here, but sometimes those aren't always true as the saw gets bumped or used and things like that and wears. Sometimes those get off just a little bit, especially in our educational setting with lots of different people using them. And so one of the things, especially when you get back up to 90, that you want to do is you want to take a square, okay, and you want to make sure that you're going to lay at a 90 degree this way. And so basically the best way to do that is to put your saw down and then take your square and make sure you're flat against the blade and that your square sits flat against the fence. That makes you know that your angle cuts are back to 90 and you're good. And this one looks to be in great shape. Also, if you want to make sure that your miter is off, sometimes you take this combination square and you take the ruler part out because it'll hit on things. And you just lay that flat, put it down, and check to make sure that your blade, as this sits flat on the table, is perfectly perpendicular in that area also. And so we're back to good shape with that. And so those are a couple different ways to make sure that your blade is squared up and things when you want to make regular cuts. The last thing to talk about is that in addition to being a compound miter saw, this is also what's called a sliding compound miter saw. So we said earlier that the blade was 10 inches. Well, if you've got a board that's wider than 10 inches, how do you cut it? Well, the sliding miter compound miter saw allows you to slide the saw out, make a cut, and slide it back on stock that's wider. And that's what this part of the table is for. It's so that the saw will come out and slide that far back. Right now, we've got the slider locked, and to unlock it, you just come over here and there's this little release piece right here. You turn it down, and now you've unlocked your saw so that it can slide, okay? Now, it's important to note that when using the sliding miter, you are always going to pull out first, plunge second, push back third, okay? Slide out first, plunge second, slide back third. You do not plunge and then pull towards you. The way the blade spins, the teeth will grab that if you try to pull it forward you and kick the board back out at you. And so make sure you pull out, down, back, okay? Now, if you're cutting something, say, like a 2x4, where you don't need the slide, that's why there's a lock on the back side and why it's great if you're cutting narrow pieces to just leave it locked. Don't fight the slide or try to figure out how to do it. Just leave it locked and just down, down as you make your cuts, okay? As you cut something that's wider that the blade won't quite go through all the way and you need to use the slide, then release it and use the slide in that manner. With that, we're going to show you how to make a few cuts with the saw, and then you'll be ready to practice it with it when you come to class. And so Michelle's going to come in and she's going to make a few cuts, and we'll go from there. So it's important to note also, just like every other tool in the shop, if you're going to make any kinds of adjustments, whether it's the angle or the miter or the compound or the slide or anything, always do all that stuff with the saw unplugged. And then when you're ready to make your basic cuts, you will plug the saw in and be ready to go. We're going to make a straight regular cut right now, and so I'm going to plug the saw in. And Michelle's just going to take a piece and she's going to lay it on there, and she's going to make her cut. One thing you'll notice that Michelle did that's right on the money is that she came down, released the trigger, and let the saw come to a complete stop in the downward position. Blade came to a stop, then she raised up the saw. The other thing you notice that she did is that before she made her cut, she made sure the blade was at full speed before making the cut. Those are two very important things. Blade at full speed before you begin to cut. Make sure it's at a complete stop before you raise it back up. Now, let's say Michelle wants to make an angled cut. The first thing we would do is go ahead and unplug. So now she's going to use the slide and going to make one more cut using the slide just so you can see how that works. Again, she's going to come out, down, and back. And that's perfect right there. There's your cut with a 30-degree miter and a 45-degree angle. Great tool to use, lots of versatility, a lot of fun to really use. We'll be using that in class this week, so we'll see you then.